Allow me to present myself, Washington Irving, at your service. And it is a pleasure to have you visit me here in my study at Sunnyside, my cottage on the Hudson River. I understand that you'll have a chance to ask me some questions, and to prepare you to ask questions, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, my life and my work. In 1802, when I was 19 years old, I introduced my first appearance in print as the superfluous observations of an odd old fellow. These were the letters of Jonathan Old-Style Gentleman. Of course, then I was only pretending to be old and odd. I was only 19 years old. And now, over 50 years later, I find myself rather more genuinely old and odd, and still offering superfluous observations. I was always fond of visiting new scenes and observing strange customs and manners. And it was either my good or evil lot to have my roving passion gratified. As it is now the custom for tourists to travel with pen in hand and to bring home portfolios filled with sketches, I find myself also inclined to jot down notes and memorandums in my ever-present notebooks and sketchbooks. Why, I see here that when I was in Oklahoma Territory in 1832, I noted in my journal that all around was a vast tract of uninhabited country, where there was neither to be seen the log house of a white man nor the wigwam of an Indian, but rather great grassy plains interspersed with forests and groves and clumps of trees and watered by the Arkansas River. Over these fertile and verdant wastes roamed the elk, the buffalo, and the wild horse in all their native freedom. I fancy that now that landscape has changed significantly over 20 years later. But you see, I have always been haunted by these inevitable changes in our world and our land as we are worked on by time, on people, on places, and even nations. Born as I was in 1783, the year that our country formally concluded our American War for Independence, I've grown up with these United States, observing and participating in the many changes of our nation, including the creation of a native literature on the foundations of old world traditions. I began writing merely on a whim. My older brother Peter had published those letters of Jonathan Old-Style Gentleman in his newspaper, the Morning Chronicle. And then a few years later, my eldest brother William, I'm the youngest of 8 brothers and sisters, my eldest brother William and I, along with his brother-in-law, published Salmagundi, or the Whim, Whams, and Opinions of Lancelot Langstaff, Esquire, and others. We were laughing philosophers, clearly of the opinion that wisdom, true wisdom, is a plump, jolly dame who sits in her armchair and laughs right merrily at the farce of life and lets the world go as it will. I was less than half educated. My schooling was spotty and undisciplined. At our home in New York, though, my 4 elder brothers and I had ample leisure time for speech making and music and writing and painting and drawing. A hopeful beau of my sister Catherine's by the name of John Anderson was quite adept with the pen and the brush, and he bestowed upon our family many of his paintings and drawings. And he even deigned to give me a sketchbook of my own. And to this day, I enjoy dallying with the brush, although I learned early on that my talent lay in sketching with words rather than pictures. My father dubbed me the philosopher for my lonely and abstracted habits. I was always dreaming and reading of travel. For me, a book of travel was like a coach at the door. I must jump in and take a ride. And so, in this way, through reading, my mind was early filled with historical and poetical associations and associations with Europe and its manners and customs. My favorite books when I was a child was a collection called The World Displayed, and I would often get caught in school reading from the little red volumes of The World Displayed when I should have been attending to my studies. As I grew older, I extended the range of my observations. I spent my afternoons of holidays rambling about the countryside along the Hudson River. I made myself familiar with every place famous in fable and association. I knew every place where a murder or a robbery was committed or a ghost seen. And I visited the neighboring villages and greatly added to my stock of knowledge by observing their manners and customs and by conversing with their sages and great men. As I had some quickness of parts, I was intended for the law, which I did study and eventually passed the bar, but I had a fatal propensity for belles lettres, and I had secretly undertaken to write a comic history of New York, Diedrich Knickerbocker's History of New York. And when it was published in 1809, to my surprise, it took with the public, and I was very celebrated because an original work at that time was something remarkable and uncommon in America. I had traveled about a little, and everywhere I went, I was honored and feted, and I was frankly overwhelmed by all the attention. In 1811, I went down to Washington, D.C., and I arrived uninvited at the White House, where Dolly Madison was hostessing a ball. And within half an hour, I was hand in glove with more than all of the assembled personages. Mrs. Madison is a fine, portly, buxom dame, with a laugh and a kind word for everyone. But as to her husband, the president, Jimmy Madison, oh, poor Jimmy, he is but a withered little Applejawn. My brothers, they saw no likelihood of my ever succeeding at the law, and they were all indulgence to me. Peter and Ebenezer had an import business that was headquartered in London, in England, and so they made me a silent partner in the business on the explicit stipulation that I would take no active part in the business, but would only pursue my literary avocations. But unfortunately, as soon as I arrived in England in 1815 to help with the business, it went bankrupt. And this was a terrific calamity for the family. And so in desperation, I resolved to take my pen in hand and to raise ourselves, our family, from the degradation to which I supposed we had been reduced. Now, I attempted no lofty theme nor sought to look wise and learned, as is very much the fashion with our modern American writers. No, I only wanted to appeal to the sympathy and the imagination of the reader. I left it to others to appeal to their reason and judgment. My writings, such as The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, are therefore to be assessed in light of the class of literature to which they belong. It is my aspiration merely to blow a flute accompaniment in the national concert, and I leave it to others to play the fiddle or blow the French horn. Well, to my amazement, the sketchbook was extremely successful. Now, I would willingly attribute its success to its intrinsic merits, but it was owing, I am afraid, to a less flattering cause. You see, it was considered something of a marvel that a man from the wilds of America should express himself in tolerable English. I was looked upon as something new and remarkable in literature, a a wild savage with a feather in his hand instead of on his head. And there was quite a curiosity to know what such a being would have to say about civilized society. So I was launched upon society in England. I became friends with Sir Walter Scott, who is a great, honest, generous-hearted being. He has been a tremendous friend to me. It was he who actually suggested that I explore German literature, and that has had a great influence on my writing as a result. Well, I eventually turned from writing tales and sketches to history, and I traveled to Spain. And there I immersed myself in the libraries where I was able to discover documents related to Columbus's voyages. And that then led me to the Alhambra in Spain, which perhaps I'll tell you more about if you have questions. All in all, I was away from this country for 17 years before I came back in 1832, and soon after traveled to Indian Territory. In the time we have left, I would hope we'll have some questions.
Yes, what do the characters, the Headless Horseman and Ichabod Crane, represent? And is that story a commentary on America at that time?
I've been asked to talk a little bit about the legend of Sleepy Hollow, and in particular Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman, and what they represented about America at that time. Well, as I mentioned, I had grown up rambling about the countryside of the Hudson River and observing the villages that had been settled by Dutch people centuries before. And so I was in the legend of Sleepy Hollow combining folklore that I had learned about in Germany in particular with the Native American settings. So I took legends of a wild horseman who haunted villages in Germany and transplanted it into colonial America, basically. The legend of the Headless Horseman was that he was a Hessian soldier hired by the British to fight the colonists. And so he was an expression of the fighting spirit of the colonists who resented so intensely the Hessian soldiers of fortune who were hired by the British to fight them. Perhaps we have time for another question.
My name is Leo, Singly E Academy, and my question is, how did Washington Irving die?
Now I'm being asked, as a writer still in the flesh and blood in front of you, to tell you how I died. And if I knew that, I think I would be omniscient. So I'm afraid you're going to have to wait until after I die to ask me that question.
My name is Kashuf, and I have a question is, when did you born?
I was born on April 3rd, 1783 in New York City. And as I mentioned, I'm the youngest of 8 children, and I had a pleasant childhood growing up in New York City. I actually got to sneak away to the theater sometime, even though my father, who was a deacon in the church, did not approve of that. But I enjoyed growing up in New York City.
We have a question here from Cardwell Prep.
Where were you educated?
I studied in neighborhood schools as a boy. Two of my elder brothers were lawyers, and they studied at Columbia University, but I chose not to attend college. Instead, my brothers sent me abroad in around 1805 for a little over a year. I traveled through the Mediterranean, where my ship was attacked by pirates. I was able to hide my valuables and escape unscathed from that adventure. I spent quite a bit of time in Italy on that trip, and finally made my way up to Paris and then to England and back to America again. That was my education.
I got another question. What was your favorite decade in life?
I would have to say that the decade that included my time in Spain would be the most, the one that I loved the most. The Alhambra, that palace of myth and legend where the Moors made their last stand for empire in Spain, was a place that I was able to spend a number of months in 1829. So that decade of the late 20s and the early 30s, which also took me to Indian Territory in the United States in 1832, would be my best time of life.
All right. Did you learn any Spanish in Spain, or are you bilingual or anything?
Yes, I became quite fluent in Spanish, and in fact I translated a number of Spanish documents, and so I was able to become more fluent in Spanish, I would say, than any of the other languages that I studied, such as French and German. And I was later appointed the minister to Spain by President Tyler in 1842. So I spent 4 years there as the America's ambassador to Spain.
They want to know why you were never married.
Well, that is quite a sad story, I have to say. When I was studying the law, I studied with Judge Josiah Hoffman, and I became quite infatuated with his 15-year-old daughter, Matilda. But I'm sad to say that she passed away very suddenly from consumption, a kind of disease of the lungs. And I was devastated. It was only in completing my history of New York and the success that it brought me that I was able to move past losing Matilda. Now, when I was in Dresden, Germany in the 20s, I became close to a family living there in Dresden, an English family, the Fosters, and I did propose to Miss Emily Foster, but she declined my proposal. Perhaps she thought that I was too old for her. I was twice her age. So after that, that was my last time to seriously consider marriage.
My name is Jonathan. My question is, how did you get appointed to be a minister?
How was I appointed to be the ambassador or minister to Spain, which is actually a very interesting story. I was first the secretary to the embassy in London, and Martin Van Buren, who had been appointed to become the new ambassador to whom I would be secretary, arrived only to learn that he had not been confirmed by Congress. And so I advised him on how to handle that situation gracefully and predicted that he would become the next president of the United States, which indeed came to pass. And so I was part of that Jacksonian party. Martin Van Buren was first vice president under Andrew Jackson and then succeeded him as president. But when my brother Ebenezer needed a job, I asked Martin Van Buren to give him a sinecure, a political appointment, and Martin Van Buren, despite our long friendship, did not follow through. And so I threw my support to William Henry Harrison in that next election, and Harrison defeated Van Buren. And unfortunately, he only stayed in office 1 month. He caught cold at his inauguration and died within a month. But his vice president, Tyler, to thank me for supporting them and getting them into the White House, appointed me as minister to Spain. So it pays to have friends in high places and to listen when they ask you for favors. Thank you very much for your questions and your attention today. I very much appreciate our time together.